There's been some really provocative analysis around Russia's reaction to these new sneak attacks from the West, especially when you look at the discussion framed by Dr. Pietro Shakarian.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating how the narrative covers so many layers, from like geopolitical maneuverings to the underlying relationships between Russia and Iran.
Exactly. So essentially, what we're seeing is that only a few days after Israel's unanticipated strike on Iran, there's already this heightened anticipation of further US intervention, maybe even a direct military
Yep, I
attack.
get that. And what's really interesting is the focus on the Russian response, right? How they're positioning themselves, especially given their messy yet strategic support for Iran.
Yeah, it's like Russia is not just passively watching, but is actively recalibrating its political ties, particularly with Iran, in this evolving conflict scenario.
Indeed. And then there's this whole idea of Iranian assets. The discussion digs into just how enormous and significant these assets really are for the regime, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Iran's enormous assets are not just material, they're like symbolic of a broader regional influence that's tied to its historical depth.
Yeah, totally. Right. And you see Dr. Shakarian's insight into Israel's military strategy. He unpacks how Israel's actions, the so called sneak attacks, are evolving tactics. Do you think this is a calculated move?
I do think it's calculated, but also it carries a lot of risk. It's like playing with fire when a state leverages covert operations, but opens up the possibility for escalation.
Yep, that makes sense. And then you've got the looming specter of nuclear weapons coming into the picture, with some chapters even delving into Israel's nuclear posture. That's something that really amplifies the stakes.
Precisely. The conversation on Israeli nuclear weapons is a key part of all this. It raises questions like how does nuclear deterrence mix with sneak attack tactics?
That's a pressing thought. Sure. And what's equally interesting is the mixture of sentiments in Russia toward Israel. The podcast touches on that mixed feelings aspect, which seems almost contradictory.
Yes, it's quite a nuanced perspective. On one hand, Russia is openly critical of Western moves, but on the other, there's a sort of reluctant acknowledgement of Israel's strategic prowess.
Right? I see what you mean. Now, here's something that challenges me a bit. Some argue that this mutual skepticism might even be fueling a sort of cycle of mistrust that could, in the long run, destabilize the region further. What do you think?
I get that point, and honestly, it's valid. The very fact that we're seeing these layered strategies, Russia bolstering Iran, Israel carrying out calculated moves, and the US waiting on the sidelines, suggests a volatile dynamic that could spiral.
Yeah, I agree. And then there's the broader European angle. The discussion even veers into how the EU might become more sober in its approach or potentially face, internal contradictions about these alliances.
Absolutely. The EU is like another piece of the puzzle. It's sort of like they're watching this theater play unfold on the world stage, trying to figure out if they should remain neutral, get involved, or even adopt a more hardline stance.
Quite a predicament indeed. And interestingly enough, the podcast even touches on the influence of Baltic elites feeding certain narratives that might exacerbate this mistrust in Europe.
Right. That angle is compelling because it draws attention to the internal pressures within Europe that could feed into a larger strategic realignment.
Exactly, it's like a domino effect. Also, I found the historical context provided by Dr. Shakarian really intriguing. His background as an Armenian historian lends a unique perspective on the enduring ties and tensions in the region.
Oh, absolutely. His insights are layered with historical nuances that really illustrate how past conflicts and alliances continue to shape modern strategies.
History does repeat itself, huh? Now, what about that point on potential US military action? There's this palpable sense of imminent response that seems to hang in the air, especially after these sneak attacks.
Yep, and it's as if the entire region is on a hair trigger. I mean, the idea of a direct US military strike, though not confirmed, is causing a lot of anxiety
Yeah,
across
definitely.
the chessboard.
And then there's also a bit about how these military strategies, particularly those by Israel, are almost forcing a new definition of warfare in the modern world. Would you say that's accurate?
I'd say it's spot on. It's like they're rewriting the military playbook. Instead of classic large scale battles, there's this focus on precision and psychological leverage.
Right, exactly. On that note, isn't it also something of a paradox that while we're discussing such high stake maneuvers, there's an underlying desire for equilibrium among the involved parties?
Yes, precisely. Despite the aggressive posturing on all sides, there seems to be an undercurrent of checking the balance, almost as if every nation is trying to avoid a runaway escalation.
Yeah, that's key. And yet, one could argue that this very mix of caution and aggression is exactly what might pump fuel into the fire. It's a fine line, huh?
For sure, it's like dancing on a razor's edge. While some might see it as a strategic balancing act, others view it as a risk that could tip into full blown conflict.
That risk is real. Also, one of the chapters even dives into how this whole scenario might lead to what some describe as the greatest tragedy if the stakes continue to escalate. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a palpable sense of foreboding there. It's acknowledging that while strategic moves might be clever on paper, the human cost and the geopolitical fallout could be enormous.
Exactly, it's a sobering reality. And then there's the part where Dr. Shakarian hints at democratizing elements within the Soviet Union's legacy. A pretty audacious idea given the current political climate, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bold take. It's like trying to reconcile two sharply contrasting visions, one of old regime legacies and another of modern democratic aspirations.
True, that's a tough balancing act indeed. Now, if we zoom out a bit, how do you see all these threads? The Western tactics, Russian responses, Iranian assets, and even European dilemmas, weaving together into a single cohesive narrative.
It's almost like a tapestry, right? Each thread, no matter how divergent, is interlaced with the others to form a picture of a world on the brink of transformation.
Yeah, that analogy works perfectly. There's a lot at stake here, not just in terms of diplomacy, but in the redefinition of global alliances. How do you think this will affect future policymaking in the West?
I think it forces a sort of reckoning. Policymakers will have to confront these new dynamics head on, where, for instance, covert tactics and overt alliances are not mutually exclusive, but are part of a broader integrated strategy.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of strategies, what do you make of the critique that sometimes in all this maneuvering, there's an element of spectacle over substance, that the actions might be more about signaling than actual conflict resolution?
I can see that point. It's like a military version of a political theater, where posture and performance are sometimes prioritized over real, tangible outcomes.
I hear you on that. Exactly so. And that performative aspect might even embolden other nations to engage in similar tactics, thereby increasing the risk of miscommunication or worse, accidental escalation.
Right, and in that sense, the whole scenario is a double edged sword. While it might serve as a deterrent for some, for others, it's a dangerous game of brinkmanship.
Absolutely, it's a high stakes gamble. Summing it up, then, we see a world where historical ties, evolving military strategies, and modern geopolitical ambitions converge in ways that are, frankly, unpredictable and fraught with peril.
Yes, it's a dynamic that's constantly in flux, one where every calculated move could potentially shift the global balance significantly.
No doubt about that. And I guess the takeaway here might be that while strategy and bravado dominate the headlines, there's a deep underlying complexity that demands careful, continuous analysis.
Exactly. And as we watch these developments unfold, it's like a reminder that every power's maneuver is interconnected, a delicate dance where one misstep could change everything.
Right on.